Thomas had been running his ranch alone for what felt like forever. 15 long years had passed since he bought the place, and honestly, most people in town barely knew what his voice sounded like. He wasn't rude or anything, just quiet, really quiet. The kind of man who would nod instead of saying hello, and wave instead of having a conversation. His wife had passed away 10 years ago from a terrible illness. And after that, Thomas just threw himself into work. Sunrise to sunset, he'd be out there with the cattle, fixing fences or doing whatever needed doing on the ranch. Talking seemed pointless when there was nobody special to talk to anymore. Then about 6 months back, he hired this woman named Rosa to help keep the house in order. She was in her early 30s, seemed nice enough, and most importantly, she didn't try to make small talk all the time. Thomas appreciated that. Rosa had a little daughter too, an 8-year-old girl named Maria who would sometimes come by after school. Sweet kid, always polite and quiet like her mother. The thing is, Thomas noticed things. Years of working with animals and land had made him observant. You had to be. When a sick calf could mean the difference between profit and loss, or when a storm brewing on the horizon meant you had 2 hours to get everything secured. So even though he didn't talk much, his eyes were always working, always picking up details that other folks missed. It was a Tuesday morning in October, one of those crisp fall days when the air smells clean and the coffee tastes extra good. Thomas was sitting on his porch like he did every morning, watching the sun come up over the hills and sipping from his favorite mug. That's when he saw it. Rosa was carrying a basket of laundry out to the clothesline, and she was limping. Not a little limp either, but the kind where you could tell every step hurt. Her face would tighten up, her jaw would clench, and she'd pause for just a second before taking the next step. It was subtle, but it was there. Thomas frowned into his coffee. Had she always walked like that? He tried to remember, but honestly, he'd been so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't really paid attention. The more he watched that morning, though, the more he noticed. When Rosa bent down to pick up a dropped dish towel, she used the fence post to steady herself. When she walked up the porch steps, she gripped the railing so tight her knuckles turned white. Something was definitely wrong. Over the next few days, Thomas started paying closer attention without making it obvious. He'd always been good at watching without seeming like he was watching. Another skill you picked up when you worked with nervous horses and skittish cattle. What he saw worried him more each day. Rosa wore long skirts every single day, even when it got pretty warm in the afternoon. That seemed odd for someone doing housework and cleaning. She'd pause whenever she thought nobody was looking, leaning against counters or door frames, taking deep breaths like she was trying to manage pain. And that limp, it was getting more noticeable. Some mornings it was worse than others. The really telling moment came on Friday afternoon. Little Maria had dropped her backpack, and some books spilled out everywhere. Rosa bent down to help pick them up, and Thomas, who was passing by the window, heard her let out this small gasp of pain. She covered it up quick, smiling at her daughter like nothing was wrong. But Thomas had heard it clear as day. That evening, instead of heading straight to the barn like usual, Thomas did something he never did. He stayed in the kitchen, just lingered there, pretending to look through some mail while Rosa was finishing up the dinner dishes. The silence stretched out between them, but this time it felt different. Heavy somehow. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. The sound was so unusual that Rosa actually jumped a little. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice came out rough and scratchy from not using it much. Rosa's eyes went wide. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, surprised that this man who barely spoke had suddenly asked her a direct question. She shook her head quickly, maybe too quickly, and forced this bright smile onto her face. "Oh no, Mr. Thomas, I'm fine. Just a bit tired is all. You know how it is running around all day." She laughed, but it sounded fake even to Thomas's ears, and he wasn't exactly an expert on social situations. "Nothing to worry about at all," she continued, drying her hands on a towel a bit too vigorously. "I should get going, actually. Maria has homework, and I need to make sure she eats properly." Thomas just stood there looking at her with those steady eyes of his. He'd spent enough time around wounded animals to recognize when someone was hurting and trying to hide it. The way she was standing, putting all her weight on her right leg. The way her hand kept drifting to her left hip like she wanted to rub it but stopped herself. The tension around her eyes that came from dealing with constant pain. "Okay," he said finally, because he wasn't the type to push. But in his head, alarm bells were ringing. Something was seriously wrong. And Rosa was either too proud or too scared to ask for help. After she left that evening, Thomas sat on his porch for a long time, watching the sun set and thinking. He wasn't a nosy person by nature. He believed in minding his own business and letting others mind theirs. But there was something about this situation that didn't sit right with him. Rosa was a hard worker, always did more than what was expected, and she was raising her daughter all alone. That couldn't be easy even without whatever was causing that limp. His late wife used to tell him that good people should help good people when they could. That's how the world stays decent, she'd say. Thomas had mostly kept to himself since she'd passed, but those words echoed in his head now. He made a decision then and there. He was going to find out what was really going on with Rosa, whether she wanted to tell him or not. Not to be intrusive, but because sometimes people needed help and were too stubborn or scared to ask for it. And if there was something he could do to help, well, he had the means to do it. The next morning, Thomas started making some phone calls. It was time to do a little digging, and he knew exactly where to start. Thomas had been running his ranch alone for what felt like forever. 15 long years had passed since he bought the place, and honestly, most people in town barely knew what his voice sounded like. He wasn't rude or anything, just quiet, really quiet, the kind of man who would nod instead of saying hello, and wave instead of having a conversation. His wife had passed away 10 years ago from a terrible illness, and after that, Thomas just threw himself into work. Sunrise to sunset, he'd be out there with the cattle, fixing fences or doing whatever needed doing on the ranch. Talking seemed pointless when there was nobody special to talk to anymore. Then about 6 months back, he hired this woman named Rosa to help keep the house in order. She was in her early 30s, seemed nice enough, and most importantly, she didn't try to make small talk all the time. Thomas appreciated that. Rosa had a little daughter too, an 8-year-old girl named Maria who would sometimes come by after school. Sweet kid, always polite and quiet like her mother. The thing is, Thomas noticed things. Years of working with animals and land had made him observant. You had to be. When a sick calf could mean the difference between profit and loss, or when a storm brewing on the horizon meant you had 2 hours to get everything secured. So even though he didn't talk much, his eyes were always working, always picking up details that other folks missed. It was a Tuesday morning in October, one of those crisp fall days when the air smells clean and the coffee tastes extra good. Thomas was sitting on his porch like he did every morning, watching the sun come up over the hills and sipping from his favorite mug. That's when he saw it. Rosa was carrying a basket of laundry out to the clothesline, and she was limping. Not a little limp either, but the kind where you could tell every step hurt. Her face would tighten up, her jaw would clench, and she'd pause for just a second before taking the next step. It was subtle, but it was there. Thomas frowned into his coffee. Had she always walked like that? He tried to remember, but honestly, he'd been so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't really paid attention. The more he watched that morning, though, the more he noticed. When Rosa bent down to pick up a dropped dish towel, she used the fence post to steady herself. When she walked up the porch steps, she gripped the railing so tight her knuckles turned white. Something was definitely wrong. Over the next few days, Thomas started paying closer attention without making it obvious. He'd always been good at watching without seeming like he was watching. Another skill you picked up when you worked with nervous horses and skittish cattle. What he saw worried him more each day. Rosa wore long skirts every single day, even when it got pretty warm in the afternoon. That seemed odd for someone doing housework and cleaning. She'd pause whenever she thought nobody was looking, leaning against counters or door frames, taking deep breaths like she was trying to manage pain. And that limp, it was getting more noticeable. Some mornings it was worse than others. The really telling moment came on Friday afternoon. Little Maria had dropped her backpack and some books spilled out everywhere. Rosa bent down to help pick them up, and Thomas, who was passing by the window, heard her let out this small gasp of pain. She covered it up quick, smiling at her daughter like nothing was wrong. But Thomas had heard it clear as day. That evening, instead of heading straight to the barn like usual, Thomas did something he never did. He stayed in the kitchen, just lingered there, pretending to look through some mail while Rosa was finishing up the dinner dishes. The silence stretched out between them, but this time it felt different. Heavy somehow. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. The sound was so unusual that Rosa actually jumped a little. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice came out rough and scratchy from not using it much. Rosa's eyes went wide. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Surprised that this man who barely spoke had suddenly asked her a direct question, she shook her head quickly, maybe too quickly, and forced this bright smile onto her face. "Oh no, Mr. Thomas, I'm fine. Just a bit tired is all. You know how it is running around all day." She laughed, but it sounded fake even to Thomas's ears, and he wasn't exactly an expert on social situations. "Nothing to worry about at all," she continued, drying her hands on a towel a bit too vigorously. "I should get going, actually. Maria has homework, and I need to make sure she eats properly." Thomas just stood there looking at her with those steady eyes of his. He'd spent enough time around wounded animals to recognize when someone was hurting and trying to hide it, the way she was standing, putting all her weight on her right leg, the way her hand kept drifting to her left hip like she wanted to rub it but stopped herself, the tension around her eyes that came from dealing with constant pain. "Okay," he said finally, because he wasn't the type to push, but in his head alarm bells were ringing. Something was seriously wrong, and Rosa was either too proud or too scared to ask for help. After she left that evening, Thomas sat on his porch for a long time, watching the sun set and thinking. He wasn't a nosy person by nature. He believed in minding his own business and letting others mind theirs. But there was something about this situation that didn't sit right with him. Rosa was a hard worker, always did more than what was expected, and she was raising her daughter all alone. That couldn't be easy even without whatever was causing that limp. His late wife used to tell him that good people should help good people when they could. That's how the world stays decent, she'd say. Thomas had mostly kept to himself since she'd passed, but those words echoed in his head now. He made a decision then and there. He was going to find out what was really going on with Rosa, whether she wanted to tell him or not. Not to be intrusive, but because sometimes people needed help and were too stubborn or scared to ask for it. And if there was something he could do to help, well, he had the means to do it. The next morning, Thomas started making some phone calls. It was time to do a little digging, and he knew exactly where to start. Rosa stared at the check like it might bite her. $50,000. The exact amount she needed. The number that haunted her dreams and kept her awake at night doing mental math that never quite added up. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper, barely believing it was real. "Mr. Thomas, Her voice cracked. She couldn't finish the sentence. Tears were streaming down her face now, and she didn't bother wiping them away anymore. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He'd never been good with emotions, especially tears. When his wife cried, he'd just hold her hand and wait it out. But he couldn't do that with Rosa, so he just pushed forward with what he needed to say. "It's not a gift," he said firmly. "I need you to understand that. I don't do charity. I do business. This is business." Rosa looked up at him, confused, still crying. "I don't understand." Thomas took a deep breath. He'd rehearsed this in his head about 20 times, but now that the moment was here, the words felt clumsy in his mouth. "Here's what I'm proposing. I pay for your surgery, all of it, whatever it costs, however long the recovery takes. In return, you keep working for me. Your regular wages go toward paying me back, but there's no interest, and you set the payment schedule. Take 5 years. Take 10. I don't care. We'll write it all down proper and legal so you know it's a real arrangement, not charity. But Mr. Thomas, at my current salary, it would take—" "I'm not done," Thomas interrupted. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his ranch. It was easier to talk when he wasn't looking directly at her. "This house is too big. It's been too big for years. Rooms just sitting empty, collecting dust. And Maria needs stability. Kids need that. So here's the rest of the deal. You and Maria move into the main house. There's 3 empty bedrooms upstairs. You can pick whichever ones you want. No rent. You're already keeping the house clean anyway, so it makes sense." Rosa stood up so fast her chair almost tipped over. "Mr. Thomas, that's too much. I can't." "Possibly. You can and you will," Thomas said, turning to face her. His voice was gruff but not unkind. "Listen to me. I lost my wife 10 years ago. This house has been quiet as a tomb ever since. Too quiet. I rattle around in here like a ghost. Having people around, having life in this place again, that's worth something to me. That's worth a lot, actually. But people will talk," Rosa said weakly. "You know how this town is. They'll say terrible things." Thomas shrugged. "Let them talk. I stopped caring what people thought about me a long time ago. Besides, we'll have everything documented. A proper employee contract. Housing as part of the compensation package, the surgery loan with repayment terms. All official and above board. Anyone wants to gossip, that's their problem, not ours. Rosa sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. How could he explain it? He wasn't even sure he understood it himself. Finally, he said, My wife used to tell me that good people should help good people when they can. That's how the world stays decent. You're a hard worker. You show up on time, you do good work, you're raising your daughter right. That's the kind of person worth investing in. He came back to the table and sat down, looking Rosa in the eye. And I'm not blind. I see you struggling. I see you hurting. I've watched wounded animals too long not to recognize pain when I see it. You need help, and I'm in a position to give it. It's that simple. Nothing's that simple, Rosa whispered, but she was looking at the check again. Hope and fear warred on her face. It is if we make it that simple, Thomas replied. Look, I know about pride. I know about not wanting handouts. This isn't a handout. This is an investment in a good employee, and a business arrangement that benefits both of us. You get your surgery, I get someone managing this house properly, and maybe some company for a change. Fair trade? Rosa picked up the check with shaking hands. $50,000. She could get the surgery. She could walk without pain. She could play with Maria without gasping and hiding grimaces. She could have a future that wasn't just about enduring each day. What about Maria? She asked. She's 8. 8-year-olds are loud and messy and they get into things. For the first time in their entire conversation, something that might have been a smile flickered across Thomas's face. This is a ranch, we've got space. A kid running around might do this place some good, besides she's a good kid. Quiet like her mother. I've seen her around. She's got manners. She'll need to know the rules, Rosa said, and Thomas realized she was actually considering this. Her mind was working through logistics now instead of just rejecting the idea outright. We'll figure out the rules together, Thomas said. I'm not unreasonable. I don't expect silence and perfection. I just expect respect and honesty. Same things I offer. Rosa was quiet for a long time, staring at the check. Thomas let her think. This was a big decision, maybe the biggest of her life, and he wasn't going to rush her. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, the evening crickets were starting their nightly song. Finally, Rosa looked up at him. Can I ask you something? Sure. What if I can't pay you back? What if something happens, I lose the job or get sick again, or... Then we figure it out, Thomas interrupted. Life happens. I understand that better than most. We're not going to set terms so strict that one bad month ruins everything. This is a partnership, not a prison sentence. Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know what to say. Say yes or say no, Thomas replied. Those are the only two answers I need. What about a trial period? Rosa asked hesitantly. What if Maria and I move in and it doesn't work out? What if you hate having us around? Thomas considered this. 1-month trial. If either of us isn't happy with the arrangement after a month, we reassess. But the surgery happens regardless. That's not conditional on you living here. That's just the loan agreement, separate from the housing situation. Deal? Rosa stood up, still holding the check like it might disappear if she let go. She walked around the table and did something that surprised both of them. She hugged Thomas. Just a quick, tight hug that lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough to convey everything she couldn't put into words. Thomas patted her back awkwardly, his face flushing red. He wasn't used to physical contact, especially not emotional physical contact. When Rosa stepped back, she was crying again, but these were different tears, relief tears, hope tears. Thank you, she said. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. You can thank me by getting that surgery scheduled and getting yourself fixed up, Thomas said gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude, and by making more of that chicken and rice. That was good. Rosa laughed through her tears. I can do that. Good. Now go home and talk to Maria about all this. See how she feels about it. Kids should have a say when their whole life is about to change. Come back tomorrow and we'll start making plans. I'll call my lawyer, get all the paperwork started so everything's legal and proper." Rosa nodded, carefully folding the check and putting it in her purse. She gathered her things in a daze, like she was moving through a dream. At the door, she turned back. "Mr. Thomas, why didn't you just fire me and hire someone who wasn't broken?" Thomas looked at her steadily. "You're not broken, you're just hurt. There's a difference. Hurt things heal if you give them the chance. Broken things give up. You never gave up. Not for one day. That's not broken, that's strong." After Rosa left, Thomas sat alone in his kitchen for a long time. The house felt different somehow. Less empty, maybe, even though it was still just him there. He'd made a decision that would change everything, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel scared of change. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was doing something his wife would have been proud of. Tomorrow he'd call his lawyer. Tomorrow he'd start the paperwork. Tomorrow his quiet, solitary life would start becoming something else entirely. But tonight, he just sat with the feeling of having done something right. Small towns have a special talent for spreading news, and Cedar Creek was no exception. By the time Rosa had her surgery scheduled, somehow everyone in town seemed to know about Thomas's arrangement with his housekeeper. And boy, did they have opinions about it. It started innocently enough. Rosa went to Dr. Peterson's office to schedule her surgery, and naturally the receptionist heard the conversation. The receptionist mentioned it to her sister who worked at the grocery store. The grocery store sister told her husband, who was a mechanic. The mechanic mentioned it to his customers, and like wildfire the story spread. But here's the thing about stories in small towns: they never stay the same as they travel. They grow and change and take on details that never existed. By the end of the first week, half the town thought Thomas and Rosa were secretly dating. The other half thought Rosa was taking advantage of a lonely old rancher. Never mind that Thomas was only 52 and hardly old. The church ladies were the worst. They met every Wednesday for their prayer group, but honestly more gossip happened than praying. Martha, who ran the flower shop, was particularly vocal about the whole situation. "I'm just saying it doesn't look right," she told the group, clutching her pearls literally and figuratively. A single woman moving into a single man's house? With a child? What kind of example does that set? But her friend Dorothy, who'd known Thomas since he was a boy, defended him. "Oh, hush, Martha. Thomas is helping someone in need. That's Christian charity right there. We should be praising him, not gossiping about him." "Charity?" Martha sniffed. "Is that what we're calling it? I heard they're living together in sin." "They're not living together like that," Dorothy shot back. "Good grief, woman. You make it sound scandalous. She works for him. He's providing employee housing. Lots of ranches do that." Meanwhile, at the local diner, the men had their own take on things. Some admired Thomas for stepping up and helping Rosa. Others questioned whether he was being smart or being a fool. $50,000, Joe, the hardware store owner, whistled low. "That's a lot of money to loan to an employee. What if she just takes off? What's his guarantee she'll pay him back?" But Frank, who'd known Thomas for years, shook his head. "Thomas isn't stupid. He'll have it all in writing. Besides, Rosa's not that kind of person. She's been busting her back working multiple jobs just to keep her head above water. That's not someone who's looking for a handout." The gossip reached its peak when Rosa and Maria actually moved into the main house. It was a Saturday morning and Rosa didn't have much to move. Just a few boxes of clothes, some books, Maria's toys, and personal items. Their furniture had been sold off long ago to help pay medical bills. Thomas had arranged for a couple of ranch hands to help with the heavy lifting, and the whole thing took less than 2 hours. But it felt like the entire town drove by that day. Cars slowed down as they passed the ranch entrance. People suddenly needed to take that particular road for no apparent reason. Some were more obvious than others. Mrs. Henderson from the library actually pulled into the driveway, claiming she'd gotten lost, even though she'd lived in Cedar Creek her entire life. Thomas watched this parade of nosiness from his porch with a mixture of irritation and amusement. Let them look. Let them talk. He'd meant what he said to Rosa. He'd stopped caring about other people's opinions a long time ago. But Rosa was more sensitive to it. That first week, she barely left the ranch. She'd do the grocery shopping early in the morning when fewer people were around. She'd keep her head down and speak quietly. Thomas noticed she seemed anxious, jumping at unexpected sounds, worried about doing something that might embarrass him or make the gossip worse. Things came to a head at church that first Sunday. Rosa wasn't sure about going. She told Thomas she might just stay home, maybe take Maria to the later service when he wasn't going. But Thomas, who hadn't set foot in that church since his wife's funeral, surprised everyone, including himself. "We'll go together," he announced at breakfast. "All three of us." As a household, Rosa looked terrified. "Mr. Thomas, I don't think that's a good idea. People are already talking. So let's give them something real to talk about instead of the nonsense they're making up," Thomas replied, sipping his coffee calmly. Walking into that church was like walking into a hornet's nest. The entire congregation seemed to turn and stare at once. Thomas walked in first, followed by Rosa and Maria. You could have heard a pin drop. The whispering started immediately, a soft susurrus of shock and speculation that filled the old building. Thomas led them to a pew near the front, not his usual spot in the back corner where he used to sit with his wife. This was a statement whether he fully realized it or not. Rosa sat stiffly, her face burning red, acutely aware of every eye on them. Little Maria, bless her heart, seemed oblivious to the tension, happy just to be at church with her mother, not limping in pain for once. After the service, Father Miguel made a point of greeting them warmly, shaking Thomas's hand and welcoming Rosa and Maria. But the gauntlet was really in the fellowship hall, where everyone gathered for coffee and donuts. Thomas could see Rosa considering making a run for the car, but he gently touched her elbow. "We stay," he said quietly. 15 minutes. Show them there's nothing wrong happening here." Those 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Some people were kind. Dorothy came over immediately, bringing Maria a donut and complimenting Rosa on her dress. Frank and his wife stopped by to say hello, making normal conversation about the weather and the ranch. But others were less subtle. Martha walked by with her nose in the air, deliberately not acknowledging them. A group of younger women whispered and giggled in the corner, shooting looks their way. One older man, someone Thomas barely knew, actually had the nerve to come up and ask, "So Thomas, you running a boarding house now or what?" Thomas fixed him with a look that could freeze water. "I'm helping someone who needed help." "Got a problem with that, Harold?" Harold backed off quickly. No problem. Just making conversation." The talk didn't stop, though. If anything, it got worse. People started creating whole narratives that had nothing to do with reality. Someone spread a rumor that Rosa was pregnant with Thomas's baby, which was ridiculous on multiple levels. Someone else claimed Thomas was going to adopt Maria and marry Rosa, which they'd supposedly heard from a reliable source. The worst of it came from an unexpected direction. About 2 weeks after Rosa's surgery, which had gone well, she was recovering at the house. Thomas had hired a temporary helper to handle the heavy housework while Rosa healed. That's when Robert Chen, a reporter from the county newspaper, showed up at the ranch. Thomas was fixing a fence when the man drove up, getting out of his car with a notebook and a camera. "Mr. Thomas?" "Robert Chen from the Cedar Creek Gazette. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your arrangement with your housekeeper." Thomas set down his tools slowly. "My arrangement with my employee is private business. But sir, the community is interested. A prominent rancher paying for medical procedures, moving employees into his home. There's human interest there. People want to know. People want to gossip," Thomas interrupted. "And I'm not interested in feeding that. You can leave now." "Is it true you gave her $50,000? Are there romantic feelings involved? What about the child?" Thomas stepped closer, and something in his demeanor made the reporter take a step back. "I'm going to say this once. What I do with my money on my property with my employees is my business. Rosa needed surgery. I helped. End of story. Now get off my land before I call the sheriff for trespassing." The reporter left, but not before snapping a few photos. Thankfully, the newspaper editor, who'd known Thomas for years, killed the story before it could run. But the damage was done. Thomas realized that this wasn't going to blow over quietly. That evening, he sat down with Rosa, who'd heard about the reporter incident from the temporary helper. She looked miserable, guilty, like this was all her fault. "Maybe Maria and I should move back out," she said quietly. "I don't want to cause you trouble." "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "We made a deal. More importantly, you're recovering from surgery. You need to be somewhere you can rest and heal properly. What people think doesn't matter. But your reputation, My reputation survived my wife dying and me becoming a hermit for 10 years. It'll survive this too. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Listen, I'm going to do something I should have done from the start. I'm going to make a public statement, set the record straight once and for all. And he did. The very next day, Thomas posted a letter on the community bulletin board at the town hall, the grocery store, and the diner. It was short, direct, and very Thomas. To the people of Cedar Creek, I hired Rosa Martinez as my housekeeper 6 months ago. She's an excellent employee. When I learned she needed medical treatment she couldn't afford, I offered her a loan with fair repayment terms. I offered housing as part of her employment package because I have empty rooms and she needed stable housing for her daughter. This is a business arrangement between an employer and employee.
Everything is documented legally.
Rosa and her daughter are under my protection, and anyone who wants to spread rumors or make them uncomfortable will answer to me. If you have questions, Maria had been practicing her lines for weeks. The school was putting on a production of a simplified version of The Wizard of Oz, and Maria had landed the role of a munchkin. To an 8-year-old, this was basically the same as winning an Oscar. She practiced her 2 lines constantly, walking around the ranch singing "Follow the Yellow Brick Road," until even the cattle probably knew the words. Rosa was so proud she could barely stand it. For the first time in years, she'd be able to attend one of Maria's school events without worrying about standing for too long or finding a seat near the exit in case her pain got too bad. The surgery had been a complete success. She was walking normally now, no more limp, no more constant ache that colored every moment of her day. The play was scheduled for a Friday evening. Rosa had taken special care getting ready, wearing a nice dress she'd bought, one of the first new pieces of clothing she'd purchased for herself in 3 years. She felt good. Better than good. She felt like a normal person again, like a mom who could show up for her kid without limitations. She was surprised when Thomas appeared at the kitchen door wearing clean jeans and a button-up shirt she'd never seen before. He'd even combed his hair differently. "What are you doing?" Rosa asked, confused. "Going to see Maria's play?" Thomas said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Rosa's hand flew to her chest. "Mr. Thomas, you don't have to do that. I know you're not big on crowds and—" "Maria invited me," Thomas interrupted. "Last week. She asked if I wanted to come watch her be a munchkin. I said yes. Can't break a promise to a kid." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. She'd been crying a lot lately, but these were happy tears. Maria hadn't mentioned inviting Thomas, probably afraid of being disappointed if he said no. The fact that he'd said yes, that he was actually going, meant more than he could possibly understand. They drove to the school together in Thomas's truck. The parking lot was packed with families, kids running around in costume, and the general chaos that comes with any elementary school event. Thomas looked uncomfortable the moment they arrived, his shoulders tensing up at all the noise and people. "We can sit in the back if you want," Rosa offered. Knowing crowds weren't his thing. "Front row," Thomas said instead. "Kid's gonna look for friendly faces. Should be where she can see us." So they sat in the front row of the cafeteria, which had been transformed into a makeshift theater. Other parents filled in around them, and Rosa felt the familiar prickle of awareness that came from being watched. Some people nodded politely. Others whispered. But Thomas sat there like a rock, unbothered, saving the seat next to him for Rosa and staring straight ahead at the stage. The play was exactly what you'd expect from a bunch of elementary school kids. Some forgot their lines. One kid waved at his parents in the middle of a scene. The tornado sound effect didn't work right. It was chaotic and adorable and perfect. When Maria came out with the other munchkins, singing their welcome song, her face lit up like the sun when she spotted Thomas and her mother in the front row. After the performance, Thomas did something nobody expected. He stood up and clapped louder than anyone else in that cafeteria. This silent, reserved man who barely spoke was giving an 8-year-old girl a standing ovation for playing a munchkin with 2 whole lines. Other parents started standing too until everyone was on their feet applauding. Backstage, Maria rushed into her mother's arms, then surprised everyone by hugging Thomas's legs. "You came! You really came!" "Course I came," Thomas said gruffly, patting her head awkwardly. "You were good, real good. Best munchkin in the whole show." What happened next would become the talk of the town for weeks. Principal Anderson approached them, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been running Cedar Creek Elementary for 20 years. She shook Thomas's hand warmly. "Mr. Thomas, So wonderful to see you here supporting Maria. She's a delightful student. She's a good kid, Thomas agreed. Principal Anderson's expression changed, becoming more serious but gentle. I actually wanted to speak with you and Rosa about something if you have a moment. They followed her to a quieter corner of the cafeteria, Maria holding her mother's hand and bouncing with leftover excitement. The principal looked at Rosa first. Maria mentioned that the class is taking a field trip to the state capitol next month. It's educational, seeing the government buildings and the history museum. The cost is $75 per student to cover the bus and entry fees. I know that might be difficult and we do have a scholarship fund. I'll take care of it, Thomas interrupted. Everyone looked at him. Rosa started to protest. Mr. Thomas, that's not necessary. I can consider it a bonus for doing good work, Thomas said firmly. Then he looked at the principal. She needs anything else for school? Field trips, supplies, whatever? Principal Anderson looked stunned. Well, there's always needs. We have students from all kinds of situations. Some struggle to afford basic supplies and the art program is always underfunded. We rely on donations to keep it going. Thomas pulled out his wallet, took out a business card and handed it to her. Send me a list. What the school needs, what individual kids might need. I'll see what I can do. The principal's eyes welled up. Mr. Thomas, that's incredibly generous. Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Just makes sense. Good schools make good communities. My ranch does well because this community supports local business. Figure I should support the community back. By the time they left the school, word was already spreading. Thomas, the hermit rancher who barely spoke to anyone, had not only shown up to support his housekeeper's daughter, but had basically offered to help fund the school. People who'd been whispering about impropriety and scandal were suddenly seeing the situation in a different light. On the drive home, Maria fell asleep in the back seat of the truck, worn out from excitement. Rosa looked over at Thomas, who was concentrating on the dark country road. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Any of it. Coming to the play, offering to pay for the field trip, promising to help the school. I know, Thomas said. Then why did you? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, when my wife got sick, this community showed up. People I barely knew brought food, helped with ranch work when I couldn't keep up, just supported us. I never properly paid that back. Maybe this is how I do it, he paused, then added, also Maria's a good kid. Good kids should get to go on field trips. And that principal, she's trying to do right by all those students. People like that should be supported. Rosa reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. You're a good man, Thomas. I don't think you realize how good. Thomas felt his face heat up. Just doing what's right. But it was more than that, and deep down he knew it. For 10 years, he'd shut himself away from the world. He'd stopped participating in community life, stopped caring about anything beyond his ranch boundaries. Rosa and Maria coming into his life had somehow opened a door he'd thought was permanently closed. The next Monday, Principal Anderson called Thomas with a list. It was longer than he expected, honestly. Kids needing shoes, coats, school supplies. The art program needed new supplies. The music department needed instrument repairs. The library wanted new books. Thomas looked at the total at the bottom and whistled low. It was substantial. He wrote the check anyway. When news got out about how much Thomas had donated to the school, the town's attitude shifted dramatically. Suddenly, the people who'd been gossiping about scandal were praising his generosity. The church ladies who'd been clutching their pearls were now saying they'd always known Thomas was a good man, deep down. It was almost funny how quickly opinions changed when someone did something publicly charitable. But Thomas didn't do it for the praise. He did it because he could and because it was needed. Simple as that. What he didn't expect was how it would affect his relationship with the town. People started saying hello again when they saw him. Farmers he'd barely spoken to in years stopped by the ranch to chat about weather and cattle prices. The hardware store owner gave him a discount, saying it was for supporting the community. The diner gave him free coffee. Thomas found it all a bit overwhelming if he was honest. He'd gotten used to being left alone. This new attention made him uncomfortable. But Rosa pointed out that it was good for business too. People wanted to support someone who supported the community. His ranch was prospering partly because of goodwill. More importantly, the gossip about Rosa and Maria finally died down. Instead of scandal, people saw a family. An unconventional family maybe, but a family nonetheless. Thomas, the silent rancher. Rosa, the hard-working single mother. And Maria, the bright, sweet kid who was thriving in a stable home for the first time since her father died. Things were settling into a new normal, a good normal. Thomas's house, which had been silent and empty for so long, now had life in it. Maria's drawings hung on the refrigerator. Rosa's cooking filled the kitchen with warm smells. There was laughter sometimes and conversation and the feeling of home. Thomas started to realize that helping Rosa hadn't just changed her life. It had changed his too, in ways he never expected and couldn't quite put into words. He was less lonely, less stuck, less like a man just waiting for his life to end and more like someone actually living again. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 4 months after Rosa's surgery. Thomas was out in the south pasture checking on some new calves when he heard shouting coming from the direction of the house. His head snapped up immediately. Something was wrong. You didn't hear shouting on his ranch unless something was very wrong. He started jogging toward the house, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he could make out voices. Rosa's voice, tight with fear and trying to stay calm. A man's voice, loud and aggressive, and Maria crying. Thomas broke into a run. When he reached the porch, the scene that greeted him made his blood boil. There was a man, probably in his late 30s, standing too close to Rosa. He was tall, heavy-set, with tattoos running up both arms and an angry red face. Rosa had positioned herself between this man and Maria, who was pressed against the wall behind her mother, tears streaming down her face. "You owe me, Rosa," the man was shouting. "Carlos owed me $20,000 from that business deal, and now that debt's yours. You think you can just hide out here on some ranch and I won't find you?" "I don't owe you anything, Diego," Rosa said, her voice shaking but firm. "Carlos never mentioned any business deal with you. If he did owe you money, he died 3 years ago. That debt died with him. That's not how this works," Diego shouted, taking another step forward. Rosa flinched. "I want my money and I want it now. I know you're living here with some rich rancher. You've got access to money now." That's when Thomas stepped onto the porch. "You need to leave." His voice was quiet, but something in it made Diego turn around. The two men sized each other up. Diego was bigger, probably stronger in a straight fight, but Thomas had the kind of calm, steady presence that came from years of handling dangerous animals and difficult situations. He didn't look scared. He didn't look angry. He just looked like a man who meant exactly what he said. "Who are you?" Diego demanded. "Owner of this property, and you're trespassing. Leave. Now." Diego laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Or what? You gonna make me, old man?" "If I have to," Thomas replied evenly. He moved to stand next to Rosa, not in front of her but beside her. A clear statement that she wasn't alone in this. "But I'd rather not. Just walk away. Get in your car and drive off my property." "This doesn't concern you," Diego snarled. "This is between me and Rosa, family business." "Family?" Rosa's voice cracked with anger. "You were never family, Diego. You were Carlos's brother and you were nothing but trouble. He cut you off years ago because of your schemes and your lies." Diego's face got even redder. "He owed me. We had a deal on that import business. $20,000. I have papers." "Then take those papers to a lawyer," Thomas said calmly. "But right now you're on private property. You're threatening my employee and you're scaring a child. Those are 3 very good reasons for me to call the sheriff. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Leave." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Diego's hands clenched into fists. Thomas didn't change his stance, but Rosa could feel him ready to move if needed. She grabbed Maria and pulled her daughter tight against her side. Diego took a step toward Rosa, reaching for her arm. "You're coming with me. We're gonna talk about this money and you're gonna—" He didn't get to finish that sentence. Thomas moved faster than Rosa had ever seen him move. One moment he was standing still. The next he had grabbed Diego's wrist, twisted it, and used the man's own momentum to pull him off balance and away from Rosa. Diego stumbled, caught himself and spun around with his fist raised. "Don't," Thomas warned. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "You throw that punch, it's assault. I've got witnesses. You'll be in jail before sunset." Diego looked around wildly. One of the ranch hands had appeared from the barn, drawn by the commotion. Another was standing by the corral. Both were watching carefully, ready to step in if needed. "This isn't over," Diego spat. "You can't protect her forever. That money is mine and I'm going to get it. If you come back on this property, I'll have you arrested for trespassing, Thomas said. If you contact Rosa again, we'll get a restraining order. If you try to threaten or intimidate her in any way, I've got lawyers who'll make your life very difficult. Are we clear? Diego jabbed a finger at Rosa. You haven't heard the last of this. Then he stormed off the porch, got in his beat-up truck and peeled out of the driveway, leaving dust and gravel flying. The moment he was gone, Rosa's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Thomas hadn't caught her. She was shaking, not from the pain in her leg, which was finally healed, but from fear and adrenaline and relief all crashing over her at once. Maria, Thomas called to one of the ranch hands. Take her inside, get her some water and a snack. Keep her calm. Once Maria was inside, Thomas helped Rosa to a chair on the porch. She was crying now, hard, her whole body trembling. I'm so sorry, she gasped between sobs. I didn't know he'd find me here. I didn't know he'd come. I never meant to bring trouble to your home. Hey, Thomas said gently, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. Listen to me. This is not your fault. You hear me? Not your fault, but Diego is a bully and a liar, Thomas finished firmly. I've met men like him before. They prey on people they think are weak or alone. Well, you're not alone, and you're not weak. We're going to handle this the right way. He stood up and pulled out his phone. I'm calling Sheriff Martinez. We're filing a report. Then I'm calling my lawyer. If this Diego person has legitimate claims about money owed, he can pursue them through legal channels. But he doesn't get to show up here threatening you and scaring your daughter. That stops today. Rosa wiped her eyes. What if he really has papers? What if Carlos did owe him money? I can't afford $20,000. I'm still paying you back for the surgery. Thomas shook his head. First, we need to see if those papers are real. Second, even if they are, debts don't automatically transfer to surviving spouses in most cases, especially if you didn't co-sign anything. Third, if there is a legitimate debt, we'll figure it out, but we do it through proper channels, not through some thug showing up and making threats. Sheriff Martinez arrived within 20 minutes. He was a good man in his mid-50s who'd known Thomas for years. He took statements from Rosa, Thomas, and the ranch hands who'd witnessed the confrontation. He looked at the tire tracks Diego had left and took photos of everything. I know Diego Reyes, the sheriff said, his face grim. He's got a record. Small-time stuff mostly. But he's been suspected of running various scams. If he's claiming your husband owed him money, I'd bet my badge those papers he mentioned are fake. Can you do anything? Thomas asked. I can have a talk with him, warn him to stay away. Given his record and the witnesses here, if he shows up again, we can arrest him for trespassing and harassment. But Rosa, you should definitely get a restraining order. My sister's a lawyer, handles this kind of thing. I'll give you her number. After the sheriff left, Thomas found Rosa in Maria's room. Mother and daughter were curled up together on the bed, Maria's head on Rosa's shoulder. The little girl had stopped crying but looked scared and small. Thomas knocked softly on the doorframe. Can I come in? Rosa nodded. Thomas came in and, after a moment's hesitation, sat on the edge of the bed. He wasn't good with kids, never had been, but Maria looked so scared that he felt he had to try. Hey, Maria, he said softly. You okay? Maria shook her head, fresh tears welling up. That man was scary. He was yelling at Mama. I know, Thomas said, but he's gone now. And I promise you he's not coming back. I won't let him. Promise? Maria's voice was so small, so hopeful. Promise, Thomas said firmly. You're safe here. Both of you. This is your home and nobody gets to come here and scare you. Not while I'm around. Maria surprised him by reaching out and grabbing his hand. Her little hand was so tiny in his rough, work-worn one. Thank you for making him go away. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. Some wall he'd built years ago that had finally found a weakness. Any time, kid, any time. That night, after Maria finally fell asleep, Thomas and Rosa sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Rosa's hands were still shaking slightly around her cup. I should leave, she said quietly. I should take Maria and go somewhere Diego won't find us. I can't put you in danger. You're not going anywhere, Thomas said firmly. We're not running. We're fighting. Tomorrow. We're calling that lawyer the sheriff mentioned. We're getting a restraining order. We're investigating these supposed papers Diego has. And we're making sure this gets handled properly. But what if he comes back? What if he tries something worse? Thomas looked at her steadily. Then he'll have to go through me first. And I'm a lot tougher than I look. Rosa managed a small smile despite everything. I noticed. Where did you learn to move like that? Thomas shrugged. Grew up on ranches. You learn to handle yourself when you're dealing with animals that outweigh you by hundreds of pounds. Plus, I wasn't always quiet and peaceful. Had my wild days when I was younger. Really? You? Hard to believe, I know. But yeah, I got into my share of trouble before I met my wife. She settled me down, made me into someone better. He paused. Point is, I know how to protect what's mine. And right now, you and Maria, you're under my protection. That means something to me. Rosa reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you. For everything. For the surgery. The next morning, Thomas was up before dawn as usual, but this time he wasn't alone. Rosa was already in the kitchen making coffee, dark circles under her eyes showing she hadn't slept much. Neither had he, honestly. He'd spent half the night listening for any sound of vehicles approaching the ranch, ready to respond if Diego came back. Couldn't sleep? He asked, though the answer was obvious. Rosa shook her head. Every sound made me jump. I kept checking on Maria. She had nightmares. Thomas poured himself coffee and sat at the table. We're going to fix this today. I've already called my lawyer. He's meeting us at 10. Sheriff's sister, the one who handles restraining orders, she's got time at 1. We're going to handle this all in one day, get everything in place. I don't even know where to start, Rosa admitted, sitting down across from him. Carlos never mentioned owing Diego money. They had a falling out years ago before Maria was born. Diego wanted Carlos to invest in some import business, but Carlos thought it sounded shady. He refused, and Diego got angry. They barely spoke after that. So this debt Diego's claiming, it's probably fake, Thomas said. My lawyer, Andrew, he's good. He'll know how to investigate this. If Diego has papers, we'll make him produce them. If they're fake, we'll press charges for fraud and attempted extortion. What if they're real? Rosa asked in a small voice. Then we deal with it, Thomas said firmly. But I don't think they are. This feels like a con. Diego probably heard you were living here. Figured I have money and decided to try to shake you down for cash. Bullies like him, they go after what seems like an easy target. I'm not easy, Rosa said, some fire coming back into her voice. Thomas almost smiled. No, you're not. You're one of the toughest people I've met. You survived an accident that killed your husband. You raised a daughter alone while working 3 jobs and dealing with constant pain. You're a fighter. Now you've just got backup. The meeting with Andrew, Thomas's lawyer, was enlightening. He was a sharp man in his 60s who'd been handling legal matters for the ranch for years. He listened carefully to everything Rosa and Thomas told him, taking notes and asking detailed questions. This smells like a scam, Andrew said bluntly. The timeline doesn't work. If Carlos died 3 years ago and this was a legitimate business debt, Diego should have filed a claim against the estate within a few months. The fact that he's showing up now after Rosa's circumstances have visibly improved suggests he's opportunistic. Can we prove it's fake? Thomas asked. We can certainly try. I'll need time to do some digging. Look into Diego's background. See if he has a pattern of this behavior. Check court records for any actual business filings related to this supposed import company. If he does have papers, we'll demand to see them and verify their authenticity. Most importantly, Rosa, did you ever co-sign anything with Carlos? Any business documents, loans, agreements? Rosa shook her head firmly. Never. Carlos kept all his business dealings separate. He was protective that way. After his parents lost everything in a bad investment, he made sure our personal finances and his business interests were completely separate. Good. That means even if there was a legitimate debt, which I doubt, you're not personally liable for it, the most Diego could have done was file a claim against Carlos's estate, which I assume has long since been settled. There wasn't much estate to settle, Rosa said quietly. After the funeral costs and medical bills, there was basically nothing left. The house was rented, the car was totaled, his business had already failed before the accident. Diego would have known all this. He came to the funeral, saw how broke we were. So he's absolutely running a con, Andrew concluded. He waited 3 years for you to get back on your feet, heard through the grapevine that you're working for Thomas and living at the ranch, and decided to make his move. Classic predator behavior. Andrew pulled out some forms. Here's what we're going to do. First, restraining order. We document yesterday's incident, get witness statements from the ranch hands, and establish that Diego made threats. Second, I'm going to send Diego a cease and desist letter. If he has legitimate claims, he needs to go through proper legal channels. No more showing up at the ranch. Third, I'm going to dig into his background. If we find he's done this before, we might be able to get him on fraud charges. The meeting with Sheriff Martinez's sister, Linda, was next. She was a kind but no-nonsense woman who specialized in family law and protective orders. She walked Rosa through the process with patience and understanding. We've got a strong case for the restraining order, Linda explained. Witnesses, threatening behavior, a history of conflict between Diego and your late husband, and your legitimate fear for your safety and your daughter's safety. The judge will grant this. How long does it last? Rosa asked. Temporary order goes into effect immediately and lasts until the court hearing, usually within 2 weeks. If the judge agrees at the hearing, which I'm confident he will, the permanent order can last a year or more. Diego won't be allowed to contact you, come near you, or come onto this property. What if he breaks it? Then he goes to jail, Linda said firmly. Violating a restraining order is a criminal offense. Sheriff Martinez already has his eye on Diego. If he steps 1 foot out of line, he'll be arrested. By the end of the day, the restraining order was filed. Andrew had sent the cease and desist letter. Sheriff Martinez had personally delivered a warning to Diego that any further contact with Rosa would result in immediate arrest. The machinery of justice was moving, slowly but surely. That evening, Thomas gathered the ranch hands together. There were 5 of them, good men who'd worked for him for years. He explained the situation honestly and directly. Diego might try to come back, Thomas said. If you see him or any vehicle you don't recognize, you let me know immediately. Don't approach him yourself. Just alert me and call the sheriff. Everyone understand? They all nodded. One of them, an older cowboy named Pete, spoke up. Boss, we've got your back. And Rosa and the little ones. Nobody's gonna mess with this ranch while we're around. The other hands agreed. It made Thomas feel good, knowing his people were solid. The ranch had always been more than just a business to him. It was a community, small but strong. Over the next week, nothing happened. Diego didn't show up. He didn't call. There was just silence. At first, Rosa was relieved. Then she started getting anxious in a different way. Was he planning something? Was the quiet just the calm before a storm? Stop worrying, Thomas told her one evening. They'd fallen into a routine of having tea together after Maria went to bed. Andrew found some interesting things about Diego. Turns out he's tried this scam before, at least twice that we can prove. Both times, when the victim lawyered up and fought back, he disappeared. He's a coward who goes after easy targets. When he realizes you're not easy, he'll move on. I hope you're right, Rosa said. A week later, Andrew called with news. Diego's papers are fake. Completely fabricated. I had a forensic document examiner look at the copies he submitted to the court, and they're obvious forgeries. Wrong type of paper, wrong ink dating, signatures don't match Carlos's handwriting. It's amateur hour. So what happens now? Thomas asked. I'm pressing charges. Fraud, attempted extortion, and falsifying documents. With his prior record, Diego's looking at serious jail time. And here's the best part. He fled. Left town the day after the restraining order hearing. Sheriff Martinez has a warrant out for his arrest. Rosa, who was listening on speakerphone, let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for weeks. It's really over? It's really over, Andrew confirmed. He's not coming back, and if he does, he'll be arrested on sight. That night, Rosa cried. But these were tears of relief, of release, of finally feeling safe. Thomas sat with her, not saying much because he'd never been good with words, but being present. Sometimes that was enough. I don't know how to thank you, Rosa said when she'd cried herself out. You didn't have to do any of this. The surgery was already more than anyone had ever done for me. But you stood up to Diego, you protected us. You got lawyers involved, you made sure we were safe. You're under my roof, Thomas said simply. That makes you my responsibility. And more than that, He paused, searching for the right words. You're important to me. Both of you. This isn't just about employee and employer anymore. Hasn't been for a while. Rosa looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes she'd suspected but hadn't dared hope for. Thomas? I'm not good with feelings, Thomas said, cutting her off gently. Never have been. My wife, she was the one who knew how to talk about emotions and all that. But what I can tell you is this. The last few months having you and Maria here, it's been good. Better than good. This house feels like a home again. I feel like I'm living again, not just existing. I feel the same way, Rosa admitted softly. I came here just needing a job, a way to pay for surgery. But somewhere along the way, this became home. You became... She trailed off, not quite ready to finish that sentence. "Yeah," Thomas said, understanding what she couldn't quite say because he felt it too. "Yeah." They sat in comfortable silence, hands not quite touching on the table, two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. Something that neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since that October morning when Thomas first noticed Rosa limping. So much had changed in 12 months that sometimes Thomas had to stop and catch his breath at how different his life looked now. The annual Fall Festival was happening in town today. Cedar Creek went all out for this event, the one big celebration before winter set in. There would be live music, food stalls, games for kids, and a community dinner in the evening. Thomas hadn't gone to the festival since before his wife died. For 10 years he'd avoided it, unable to face the crowds and the memories, but this year was different. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rosa asked him that morning as they got ready. She was wearing a pretty yellow dress, her hair down around her shoulders. No limp, no pain, just grace and confidence. The surgery had given her back more than just the ability to walk. It had given her back her life. "I'm sure," Thomas said. He wasn't, not really. Crowds still made him uncomfortable, and small talk still felt awkward. But Maria had been begging to go for weeks, and Rosa deserved a day of fun. More than that, Thomas was tired of hiding. Tired of being the hermit on the hill. It was time to rejoin the world. They arrived at the festival mid-morning. The town square was packed with people, colorful booths everywhere, the smell of fried food and cinnamon rolls in the air. Maria immediately spotted the face-painting booth and bounced on her toes with excitement. "Can I? Please?" "Go ahead," Thomas said, handing her some money. "Meet us back here in 20 minutes. Maria ran off, and Thomas and Rosa started walking through the festival. People noticed them immediately. Of course they did. The whole town had been talking about them for months. But the looks were different now. Friendly, approving. People waved and smiled. Some came over to chat. Dorothy from the church approached first, beaming. "Thomas, Rosa! So wonderful to see you both here. The whole town's been hoping you'd come." "Wouldn't miss it," Thomas said, surprising himself with how easily the words came out. "And how's little Maria doing?" "I heard she won the art competition at school last month." Rosa's face lit up. "She did. First place in her grade. We have the ribbon hung on the refrigerator." More people stopped by as they walked. Frank from the hardware store, Janet from the diner. Even Martha, the church lady who'd been so judgmental at first, came over to say hello and compliment Rosa's dress. The town had embraced them, accepted them as part of the community fabric. Around noon, there was an announcement over the loudspeaker. "Everyone, please gather at the main stage for some community updates and announcements." Thomas felt Rosa tense beside him. She knew what was coming. He'd told her about it last week, sworn her to secrecy. She'd argued with him about it, said it was too much, but he'd been firm. This was happening. They made their way to the stage area where Principal Anderson was standing with a microphone. Maria found them in the crowd, her face painted like a butterfly, grinning from ear to ear. Thomas lifted her up onto his shoulders so she could see better. It felt natural now, this dad-like gesture. A year ago, he wouldn't have known how to interact with a child. Now, it was second nature. Principal Anderson made several announcements about school events and upcoming programs. Then her tone changed, became more emotional. "I want to take a moment to recognize someone very special in our community. Someone who stepped up this year in a way that has changed lives." Thomas felt his face getting hot. He hated attention like this. "Thomas Webb, could you come up here, please?" The crowd turned to look at him. There was applause, genuine and warm. Rosa nudged him forward. "Go on," she whispered. "You deserve this." Reluctantly, Thomas made his way through the crowd to the stage. Principal Anderson shook his hand warmly, then addressed the crowd again. "Many of you know that Thomas made a significant donation to our school this year. What you might not know is the extent of his generosity. Because of Thomas, 15 children were able to go on field trips they couldn't have afforded. 20 students received winter coats and shoes. Our art program got new supplies. Our music department got instruments repaired. Our library got 200 new books." The crowd applauded louder. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "But that's not all," Principal Anderson continued. "Thomas also established a scholarship fund for students who need help with school expenses. It's funded for the next 5 years. He did all this quietly without asking for recognition, but today we want to say thank you." On behalf of Cedar Creek Elementary, on behalf of our students and their families, thank you, Thomas Webb. She handed him a plaque. Thomas looked at it, at the words engraved there thanking him for his service to the community, and felt emotion tighten his throat. He'd spent 10 years alone, thinking he had nothing left to give. Turned out he'd been wrong about that, too. I don't do speeches, Thomas said into the microphone, his voice rough. The crowd laughed affectionately. But I'll say this. This community supported me when I needed it most. I'm just returning the favor. And I didn't do any of this alone. Rosa Martinez, my ranch manager, she's the one who really made me see what was important. She's the one who brought life back to my ranch and back to me. So if you're thanking anyone, thank her. He looked right at Rosa as he said it, saw her eyes fill with tears. The crowd applauded again, some people whistling and cheering. When Thomas came down from the stage, several people wanted to shake his hand or pat his back. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. He finally understood what his wife used to tell him about community. You got back what you put in. For years he'd put in nothing, withdrawn completely. Now that he was engaging again, the warmth and support coming back to him was real and genuine. The real surprise came later in the afternoon. Thomas had agreed to participate in one more announcement, though even Rosa didn't know about this one. He'd kept it secret because he wasn't sure how she'd react. As the sun started setting and people gathered for the community dinner, Thomas took the microphone one more time. His hands were sweating. He'd faced down angry bulls with less nervousness than he felt right now. Got one more announcement, he said. The crowd quieted, curious. Rosa Martinez came to work for me about 1.5 years ago as my housekeeper. Over this past year, she's become way more than that. She's been managing the ranch accounts, organizing everything, improving efficiency. She's got a head for business and a work ethic that puts me to shame. People laughed. Rosa looked confused, not sure where this was going. So I want to make it official. Effective immediately, Rosa is no longer my housekeeper. She's my ranch manager and business partner. I'm giving her a 25% ownership stake in Cedar Ridge Ranch. The crowd gasped. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas kept going, needing to get it all out before he lost his nerve. She's earned it 10 times over. And more than that, she's family. Her and Maria both. This ranch is as much their home as it is mine. That should be official and legal, not just in feeling. He looked directly at Rosa. You've also paid back the surgery loan in full, 6 months early. You're debt-free. The house is yours to live in for as long as you want. No strings, no conditions. Just home, Rosa was crying openly now. So were several people in the crowd. Thomas stepped down from the stage and walked over to her. Maria was bouncing excitedly, not fully understanding what was happening but knowing it was something good. Thomas, I can't accept, Rosa started. Yes, you can, Thomas interrupted gently. You've given me back my life. Let me give you security and a future. For you and Maria. Please. Rosa threw her arms around him, not caring that the whole town was watching. Thomas hugged her back, this woman who'd changed everything without even trying. When they pulled apart, Rosa was laughing and crying at the same time. You're crazy, she said. Absolutely crazy. Maybe, Thomas agreed. But it's the good kind of crazy. As the evening went on, people kept coming up to congratulate them. The community dinner was warm and full of laughter. Maria played with other kids, running around with her butterfly face paint, completely happy and secure. This was what childhood should look like, Thomas thought. Safe and joyful. Later, after the fireworks that ended the festival, they walked back to Thomas's truck. Maria was exhausted, falling asleep against Rosa's shoulder. The night air was cool and crisp, full of the smell of autumn. Thomas, Rosa said softly as they drove home. Can I ask you something? Sure. This past year, the way you've helped us, the way you've been with Maria, the way you look at me sometimes, She paused, gathering courage. Is this still just a business arrangement to you? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the wheel. No, he said finally. It hasn't been just business for a long time. Probably never really was, if I'm honest. Then what is it? Rosa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas pulled into the ranch driveway and parked. He turned to look at Rosa, at this beautiful, strong woman who'd somehow become the center of his world. It's family, he said. It's home. I don't know all the words for what it is, Rosa, but I know I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you. Rosa reached over and took his hand. You won't, we're not going anywhere. This is home for us too. You're home for us. They sat there in the truck for a few minutes, Maria sleeping in the back seat, holding hands and not needing to say anything else. Some things didn't need words,